So the reason I wanted to talk, and this is being recorded for YouTube, is you are
Yeah,
you're the rarest of things, which is another traditionalist with a familiarity with Curtis Yarvin and that his sphere. Um, and I've been sort of tinkering at a critique of his ideas from a perennialist perspective, but since you have a view of that, well, an understanding of him, um, I was hoping we could sort of have a chat about that, and I'd be very interested to hear what your thoughts are about him and also the neo-reactionary sphere more broadly.
yeah, certainly. Um, because it's very current and and very influential, as some people are slowly discovering. But I became interested in it a long time ago, right at the beginning, from the blog of Mencius Moldbug. And it was really my students that put me onto that. What happened was around about, I don't know, 2006 or 2008, around then, you become aware of a shift in cultural capital. That is to say that some of the young people, particularly young men, were moving into a different sphere of ideas. And so I started reading some of that, and the best of that I could find was the blog by Mencius Moldbug. And it had a fantastic amount of energy and some very canvassing some very interesting ideas. And so I followed it from then.
And that's when the blog was actually still up on Blogspot and not in its current form.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. In fact, at the time, he at the time his policy was anyone that wasn't writing a blog was a shill. That was his official position. Writing blogs was what you had to do. And then he moved to Substack at a later date. But blogs were certainly fashionable at the time, and he was writing a very popular one, and at least in certain groups of people. And so I was looking at it, as you say, with a sort of traditionalist or perennialist background, or rather, more specifically, a Platonic background. And the thing that interested me in the first instance was that he was someone who wanted to break through the confines of modernity, of modern thinking. And and his tactic essentially was to read old books, and so that was a very attractive sort of move, and also a very different move at the time. At the time, I was very interested in, and I'm still interested in, Leo Strauss, who's a Platonist, and who presents very interesting views from a traditionalist point of view. I find them interesting anyway. But the thing about Strauss is that he has a very Talmudic sort of analysis of things, or approach to things. That is to say, he takes a text and he absolutely penetrates the text. He goes deeply into the text and extracts all sorts of things from it. Whereas Yarvin, or Moldbug at the time, his tactic was more open-ended. He just wanted to expand the Overton window. He wanted to read books and works that are outside of that frame altogether. And so it wasn't forensic in the way Strauss is. Rather, it was more an adventure, more an odyssey, and it was very entertaining. But that was the attraction in the first instance for me, that Yarvin is someone who decides decided to read outside of that frame. And, the tactic of exploring old books, reading old books, unfashionable ideas, is I'm sympathetic to that view in general as a traditionalist.
Indeed. So there's one thing you said on your I mean, I have my own criticisms of Yarvin, and I'd like to talk about those, but there's something you said on your Facebook group which I found very interesting, and I'm not going to get it word for word now, so I'll have to paraphrase it, but it's that Yarvin had something of a shopping cart approach to historical ideas.
Yeah.
So could
that's
you expand
right,
on
and
that?
That's what I mean by he doesn't adopt Strauss's policy of going deeply into a single body of texts, as he does into Plato, but instead Yarvin is very freewheeling, and that's right. In fact, he defines what a reactionary is. He says it's someone who isn't attached to particular ideologies, but rather wanders through history saying, well, this worked and that worked and this didn't and that didn't. At one stage he says that anyway. I think he's moved on from that sort of shopping cart sort of point of view, but he does do that. He wanders through his readings of history and collects sort of cute political ideas. But that's okay. He tries them out. He's essentially engaged in intellectual experiments, and I guess he sees that as part of his training, his technical background, and he sees these as intellectual experiments. So you find an interesting idea and you test it out. But yeah, he ends up with a shopping cart of interesting ideas. Although consequently or subsequently, he does settle into a particular school and a particular analysis of power,
which is which is a different critique. So the first critique is that it's very eclectic. Yes. But do you think it's eclectic to the point where maybe not the coherence, but that he's able to integrate these ideas in a way that's unproblematic? And that's a terribly sullied word. I apologize, but
I think that's an ongoing project for him, and that's part of the business of the blog. The thing about a blog is that your thought processes are on display, and that's very much what unqualified reservations is like. He's just sort of, it's a bit stream of consciousness, and it's very wordy, and he wanders off and rambles, and it's tangential, and he tries things out and he changes his mind, and so it's a formative process. That's one of the entertaining things about it. He's not writing manifestos or things like that. And I genuinely think it's an ongoing project for him, although he settles into a particular school of thought, doesn't he, which he calls monarchy. And he eventually settles into the Italian thinkers, political thinkers. Earlier on, he was much more deeply into Carlyle, but subsequently into Machiavelli and so forth. He's very, very eclectic and explores, but he's exploring in a particular direction.
Yeah, and I mean, I have noticed that Carlyle seems to have sort of fallen by the wayside for him. But what I was getting at with the question about the sort of coherence of his thought, I'm thinking now of this piece he wrote. I think it was one of the old unqualified reservation pieces, and the title was something like the castes of the United States, or the caste system of the United States.
Yeah.
And he sort of, he mashes together a Roman and Sanskrit categories, or Indian categories, but not in the way that sort of Genon would try to find the essential commonality between them, just in a sort of a grab bag manner.
No.
And
No, not at all.
yeah, and it
Or a Volvo. Yeah.
yes indeed, or anyone from that perspective. And then I wonder sort of how how coherent that sort of caste analysis is, or if it even really is a caste analysis. I mean, how well does he understand the concept of caste? And
Yeah.
I mean, if you could.
No, I don't.
Yes,
I don't
please.
think that he's looking at it through a caste perspective, or even through any sort of traditional perspective. I think he's just where he's using those caste labels. They're just labels, and I think he's just drawing upon it to tag labels to American power structures. So I think it's very contemporary. He's just picking up that traditional vocabulary, or some of it, and as you say, mixing it together, a bit of Roman and a bit of Indian and what have you, and then he's just sticking it as labels to expose particular power structures in contemporary America. And then he wraps it all up and he calls it a cathedral. So that's a very, very strange mixture of language that he uses there, and I don't think we can take that as any sort of serious caste analysis. So I don't regard him as traditional in any sense. I don't particularly think that he's a deep or metaphysical thinker, that is to say, or even a cosmological thinker. And as a political thinker, he's of a particular sort, but he doesn't go any further than that. That's how I feel about it.
So, any further than could you expand on that a little? Sorry, I'm trying to get you to do most of the talking because you're the guest.
I think his analysis doesn't really go much further than Thrasymachus, the arguments in the Republic, that what you end up with is an analysis of power, and that you end up with the doctrine that might is right, might determines what's right. That's the Thrasymachus argument, and the whole problem in the Republic is Socrates wants to say that there is a higher standard of justice than raw power. And I find that Curtis Yarvin's arguments are very astute about the nature of power, but they don't go any further than that. And so that his monarch, his king, is really just a thug with a big stick.
Well, yes,
in the end.
And this is something that interests me very greatly, because he cites Aristotle, and I think Plato too. Well, he's primarily Aristotelian in his reasoning for why he calls himself a monarchist, because I would describe what he talks about as a dictatorship. I think that would be a more accurate term, and you could be cynical and say he's using monarchy because has a maybe more reputable than dictatorship, or maybe it's some kind of has a marketing angle to it. But what he seems to ignore from Aristotle, or sort of Greek thought generally, is that monarchy isn't a purely descriptive term, right? It has a normative connotation to it that seems to go out the window in his usage.
Yeah, that's right. He does draw that from Aristotle's politics. That's true. He does use a mixture of that sort of language, and that's his idea of monarchy. But even then, how I feel about it is that he's rather like Ayn Rand. The situation with Ayn Rand, as far as I can tell, is that she's caught up in the paradox that the Soviet Union, which was supposed to, support the underdog and the poor and the suffering, turned out to be a tyranny, whereas the United States, which is founded on self-interest and greed, was a nation of liberty, and she can't get over that paradox. Similarly, with Curtis Yarvin, I think the problem is he's sitting in Silicon Valley and everything's working really well and they're doing exciting work and they're building the future and there's companies and startups run by CEOs and everything's smooth and terrific. But when he looks out the window at democracy, it's dysfunctional and an obstacle to progress and science and so on. And he's caught up on that paradox. He's caught up on the paradox. How is it that a company, a startup that has a benevolent dictator, the CEO, how is it that works better than a democracy? This is the inverse of our normal values. And so he's sort of caught up on that problem and that paradox, and he explores that relentlessly.
And it seems to me, and this is not an original point from myself. I've heard other people say this, but I think it's a very good observation. Is that he seems to be trying to give a Vaishik solution to what's a kshatric or even Brahminical problem. If that makes sense to you, it's, as you say, he comes from this this business. He's a computer programmer, isn't he? But the Silicon Valley background, and there's something inappropriate. There's a gap in trying to apply a mentality and solutions that work very efficiently in that context to political problems.
Well, that's right. He thinks you can naturally extrapolate from one realm into the other, from business into government. In fact, that's just a constant in his thinking, that the state should be run at a profit. The state should be run like a well-run business. An obvious criticism there would be that the state is not a business. It's a entirely different affair, but in his model they're continuous, and so he likes states like Singapore, say, which run on that sort of model.
Although even then, I think he exaggerates somewhat how business-like the running of Singapore is. But anyway, there's this interesting commonality in that regard between him and the mentality of Donald Trump. I mean, it's interesting because I think he has quite a bit of disgust for Trump. I think he's reluctant to give voice to that because I think most of his readership is very much in Trump's camp. But I think he has a sort of a personal distaste for the man. But there's this commonality in that they both seem to embody that idea that you can extrapolate from business and just apply that with very little modification to government.
Yes, yeah, that's right. That's right, and in the American context, a very different sort of notion of democracy. The idea that the majority rules. Trump is continuously saying this. We won the election. We won it comprehensively. We have the mandate. We do what we like. Whereas a liberal democracy, say a European-style democracy, is very different than that. It's all about constraints of constraining the majority to protect the minorities from a thuggish majority. That's sort of the European model.
Well,
but
no, please.
Yarvin Trump both share the idea of an effective executive, or what Yarvin called very early on in his development formalism. Formalism, and that was an attractive idea to me. The idea of formalism, it reminded me of this sort of Confucian idea of the rectification of names. That a president should preside, an executive should execute, and a plumber should go about plumbing. And so that this is sort of what Trump is about. He's about formalizing things. I think the term Yarvin takes the term from American legal philosophy. I think it's a school of thought in the Supreme Court. But I understand what he means. The idea is you have a president, but in a liberal democracy, that president is constrained at every turn by the judiciary, by the Congress, by the states, and so forth. And he can't do very much. And similarly, of course, the ultimate example of that is the English monarch, who can't do anything at all. Whereas Yarvin wants to formalise things. He wants a president to preside, and he wants a monarch to be the leader, the unquestioned leader. So it's a formalising of positions, and that is a very traditional idea because those vocations, those roles, become confused in modernity, and you get a situation described in the Republic where people don't mind their own business. Justice is minding your own business. Decay, in justice, it means everything in their right place, doing what they are supposed to be doing. And there's a lot of that in Yarvin, and that's a very traditional sort of idea.
Yes, indeed. But although there's this interesting issue with Yarvin is that he can't seem to, as sort of as hostile to democracy as he is, he can't seem to at the ultimate he can't seem to conceive any other way of legitimizing a state. I mean, you see, so he thinks of his monarch in his system, as I understand it. The monarch continues to be elected at every. I mean, that's a little unclear to me, but as I understand his proposals, it's that the monarch would continue to be, the president, dictator, whatever you want to call it, and the executive continues to be elected every 4 years, and that's the only sort of mechanism of accountability, but that's ultimately still democratic.
Of course. Well, the reason for that, though, as he explains in various of his writings, is that you can't take power without the mob. You can't take power without the masses. And as you've said in your programs, and all of these philosophies are ultimately democratic, whether it's fascism or communism or liberal democracy or what, they all depend upon the masses. And that's a term taken from physics, and they all depend upon moving that mass to where they want it. And Yarvin's no different. The authority comes from the people. And sovereignty comes from that. It's like this democratic idea that the mandate of heaven dwells in every man's heart, and that you can aggregate it and average it out. That's still there in Yarvin,
And I suppose that's the and he's quite explicit about this, that he's not the Maester, right? I mean, he's a neo-reactionary, and neo means more to him than just recent.
Yes. Yeah.
There's a fundamentally and he's self-conscious about that modern or even postmodern dimension to, or sort of he applies this modern or postmodern lens or layer to everything that he puts into his shopping cart from pre-modernity.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah. Oh yeah. That's the eclectic nature of it. There's future ideas in there as well. Yeah, a lot of quite a lot of futurism in there. Not quite as developed as there is in Musk, but there's he's a computer tech guy, and so he fully embraces that sort of world. Although I admire his project on that, the Urbit project, the quest to rebuild the internet from scratch. That's quite ambitious and
I have to admit, I'm aware of Urbit, but I'm too much of a technophobe, voluntarily or involuntarily, to really understand what that entails. I know it's a bit of a tangent, but if you could articulate it succinctly, I'd be grateful.
Yeah, well, it tells you a lot about him, because he started that from very early on, and that's what attracted. I think that attracted the attention of Peter Thiel and people like that. So it's basically a libertarian sort of project, and he thinks that if we went back and started the internet again from scratch, we wouldn't do it the way we did, like on top of phone lines and telecommunications and things like that. We'd do it completely differently. And in particular, you wouldn't have messaging through a third party through internet service providers, which he sees as the weak link in the whole thing. That you can have your service provider can cut off your service, they can censor you, they can track you, and so on, and then you get a very cosy relationship between governments and service providers. He wants to put an end to all of that by building a system that is peer-to-peer and encrypted at both ends, so that he can communicate with me, and there's an internet like that, fully like that, that's stable and completely private. That's his idea. So he said about rebuilding the internet from scratch. And that's the Urbit project. That's as best I can describe it anyway. I'm not a tech person either, but I understand his idea is to rebuild the internet on a much more stable platform with privacy built in. So it's essentially libertarian in that respect, as a political project.
Which is also, sort of bring that back to his political thought, there's sort of an interesting tension there, because I think you very correctly said that there's this sort of Trump and Yarvin think of democracy without the liberal restraint, whereas in Europe it's sort of the other way around. But there's also, in another sense, he wants to do democracy, liberalism without the democratic element. It's this. I mean, the way his ideal state would function, as I understand it, is very liberal. I mean, he's not, there's some sort of nationalistic strains in there, but he's not really a kind of, at least on my reading, a radical nationalist or anything like that. So his sort of ontological view of the world is still pretty individualistic, and he does seem to put quite a lot of quite a premium on liberty. I mean, I know he says that security is a monotonic good, but I sort of doubt that he actually believes that, because I mean that's quite obviously not true. So
there is that tension both in him and in the wider movement, I think, but between what we might call authoritarianism and libertarianism. and that's something that Yarvin explores through his blog, and is sort of ideas that he develops over time, especially in the early stages. And I think how it goes is, well, as he says, libertarians confuse small government and weak government. You don't want weak government, you just want small government. And the sort of so his position, or what's implicit in Herbert, is sort of this anarcho-capitalist thing. It's not really about the right of you and I to talk in private. It's about the ability to move money around without it being taxed.
Yeah.
So it's anarcho-capitalist. It's an anarcho-capitalist sort of technology that he wants to build there. And but anarcho-capitalist, the anarcho part of it doesn't mean that there's no government. It means that there's a very, very powerful government, but in a constrained area, in a very small area.
And then there's also sort of this natural. I mean, it makes sense then, the affinity that he would have for natural. For traditional forms of government, because those were typically strong but small, or rather they could exercise power very invasively, but not particularly extensively. I'm not sure how well I'm articulating that, but the nature of feudal organization, and also the technical limitations, meant that in a traditional society, government stayed out of your life, but when it did need to intervene, it could intervene very drastically.
That's right, and that is, in fairness, that is sort of where he gets to. I think that sort of position that you want government to stay out of your life, but when necessary, you want it to be decisive and effective. So I think that is his. I think that is his ultimate position. That's where he gets to. One of the problems with Yarvin too is that he's a first-class troll. He loves to say outrageous things. You don't know where he stands on all sorts of things, because he's just pulling your leg, or he just likes reactions.
Yeah, although to his credit, I've noticed there's decidedly less of that in Grey Mirror than there was in Unqualified Reservations. Or maybe you disagree.
But, so there's lots of pyrotechnics and trolling, but there's a genuine search for ideas. I think he's a serious person, and but he's not a religious person, and he's not a metaphysical person either. Not that he has to be, but that is a limitation when you're talking about things like the mandate of heaven and the nature of sovereignty.
Well,
and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm decidedly unimpressed by his reading of De Monarchia. No, sorry, not De Monarchia, of Patriarcha. He's right; it's a very cool title, but Robert Filmer, I mean, isn't just arguing for. I mean, his reading just reduces what you said earlier, Robert Filmer to might is right, which is not what the man is saying at all.
Yeah. I'm always just trying to situate him in the progress of the Republic in Plato. That's sort of the framework of my political philosophy, I guess.
That's very interesting. Could you talk a little bit more about that? I mean, where would you situate him in? I mean, well, you did say earlier, but I mean, would you want, maybe you wouldn't be as happy with this, but would you be willing to place him within maybe the most famous part, or one of the most famous parts, at least from a political theory perspective, of the Republic, is the regime types that Plato describes. So where would you place him in that?
Yeah. I think he's. in effect, he's in the oligarch sort of camp. But that's where we are at this stage. I'm sort of persuaded by Roger Sauter's analysis of the constitutions of the Republic in his Contrary History of the West, his long essay on that, which I find very effective. So how it goes is, the problem with democracy is that, and Yarvin knows all of this and doesn't really go further than it, though. One of the problems with democracy, or the central problem, is that when you widen the franchise, when you let everyone vote, people naturally vote for more services and less taxes. What else would they vote for? But that eventually leads to the state going bust, going bankrupt. And then what happens is someone comes along and says, well, I know where we can borrow the money. And so everyone votes for him. And that goes on until you've run out of credit. And then someone comes along and says, well, don't worry, we just print the money. And everyone votes for him. And then eventually, the burden of this becomes so enormous that someone comes along and says, you know what? We ain't going to pay anything. They can come and get it. And that's sort of the end process with the tyrant. And everyone votes for him. The question is, where are you in that sort of process, which Plato describes as sort of inevitable in the way things go? And the tyrant is the sort of the antithesis of the philosopher king. So where is Yarvin in all that? I don't think we're at the tyrant stage, but we're at the strong oligarch stage. Certainly, where America has to adjust to its slipping status in the world stage. I think that's the situation.
So, well, that leads nicely into something else I wanted to ask, which is that, I mean, Yarvin, and I think you agree with me on this, probably has more influence on the White House than he presents himself as having, or maybe he believes himself to have. But I think his ideas are certainly.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. Those of us who read him years ago are just amazed to see some of the things that are popping up in the White House. For instance, a long time ago, he proposed, which everyone took as sort of a piece of trolling, as a joke, the idea of RAGE, which is retire all government employees. And in the context, he was saying, you don't need a knight of the long knives, so you don't need to round up your enemies and shoot them all. You can just retire them. And so we just had a policy of retiring all government employees. And lo and behold, in the second Trump administration, that's exactly what you have.
And there's
Trump issued a thing inviting all government employees to take an early retirement. That's a Moldbugian idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I think, which you also pointed out earlier on Facebook, that the sort of overwhelming the established order with a sort of a wave of the executive orders.
Yeah, that's right. That's also in Moldbug. I think he got that from the Italian school of political thinking. But that's a tactic that you just overwhelm you. And I heard a commentator from within the Trump camp saying that over the last 4 years they had a team of nearly 400 people drawing up executive orders and making plans. So it was very well. All of that's very well thought out. Trump's not just winging it. And Yarvin, I think, had a very strong influence in that process. And then, probably at an arm's length, not directly.
No, certainly not directly, but we know for a fact that that J.D. Vance has read Yarvin, so you can identify a channel of at least one channel of influence there, and it seems unlikely to me that he'd be the only person in Trump's circles who's read Yarvin or reads Yarvin.
Yeah.
But also
lots of these people are the left wing hysteria has sort of got onto that, but listing all of the fascist literature that these people have been reading, you know, Evola and Guénon and so forth. There are people very close to the president who are versed in that sort of literature, who have read those ideas, yeah. And Yarvin's one of them. Steve Bannon was another, and so on. There's a whole group of them, in fact. Yeah.
But the question I was driving towards is that, and this is where I'm sort of undecided myself, is whether, and you've touched on this again before, but I want to ask nonetheless, whether Yarvin's influence is something that's for the good, by which I mean something that delays the decay, delays our slide towards tyranny, or and that is by no means necessarily something he'd be doing intentionally, or an accelerant.
Yeah. That is the tension here, isn't it? Because that futurism, that Elon Musk sort of aspect of things, the technology and so forth. Because one of the things that is certainly going on is the advancing of crypto technology, of cryptocurrencies and artificial intelligence and so forth. So there's all of that accelerationism. On the other hand, there's this reactionary return to older power structures. And in geopolitics, a return to sort of the 19th century of great power politics. So it's regressive in that respect, but accelerationist in others. Whether that amounts to a good situation or a bad one is a matter of opinion. I mean, as a Platonist, I'm not optimistic about the eventual outcome of the cycle, but that's the big picture. In short and medium term, it might be a good thing.
What's your I mean, your gut feeling? Don't ask you to rest your reputation on this, but just your intuition about whether his influence is on method benign or negative.
Well, I do have mixed feelings about it, and also caught up in sort of personal feelings about it because our current situation is that we're sort of coming to the end of the Cold War and the post-war situation. And so, you know, someone like myself, I grew up entirely under the shadow of the bomb and of mutually assured destruction and of just pathological hatred between Americans and Russians. And that was the world that I grew up in. And so to see it falling apart or being dismantled is a relief. But what comes next is an open question, isn't it? It could be worse. So, and that's how I feel about the whole project here, or everything that's going on, and about Yarvin as well. He does a great job dismantling this old paradigm, but he's not so good at offering something better, except that he wants to return to a much more traditional sort of system of mutual power based on mutual obligation and hierarchy, which would, for the simple reason that he thinks it works. he's a reader of history, and he's sitting there in the tech industry and sees how that works, and he reads history and he says the only thing that works is top-down management with a CEO at the top and little monarchies.
Mm. And
so I don't think it's a utilitarian argument he uses entirely. He says it works. It's not because it's more legitimate or anything else. It just history shows that it works. That's what works.
Although Guénon did say something to that effect, didn't he, about modern philosophers in general? They're best when they're criticizing modernity. It's their positive programs. Or,
yeah.
He said it much more elegantly than that,
there's,
but that's their. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, there's what's the alternative on offer? It's fairly easy to criticise aspects of modernity, but where do you turn to for alternatives? And in particular, where do you find an alternative that isn't liberal democracy, fascism, or communism, or some variation of those? How do you step outside of that altogether? And in the first instance, I was encouraged that Yarvin wanted to go back and read Aristotle and wanted to go back and because that's Strauss as well. Rediscover ancient political philosophy. Let's move out of the modern and reconsider all of that. So Yarvin was very good at that. But whether he can offer an alternative, a viable alternative that amounts to something like a return to a traditional norm, I think that's doubtful. He's a good analyst of power, but he doesn't get much further than, at least as much as I've read, he doesn't get much further than the arguments of Thrasymachus in the Republic.
Well, I mean,
and
go on, please.
Yeah.
No, I didn't want to interrupt you.
Sorry, what was that?
I didn't want to interrupt you. Please continue.
Oh no, that's all right. Yeah. I think that's the limitations of it for me. But it stretches the Overton window, and he's certainly inside the Overton window now. Once upon a time, he was a long-haired poet from San Francisco, and who was offering transgressive political ideas. Now he's inside the Overton window and wearing a jacket he borrowed from James Dean, and he's sort of cultivating an image now.
And I mean, I think part of the reason for his being able to only go so far is his personal inability to embrace religion, and he's given a certain interesting account of. I mean, he doesn't put that in personal terms, but I can't help but think that it is something personal, where he says it's. I mean, I'm paraphrasing him again here, but he says something to the effect that it's impossible or extremely difficult for postmodern people to embrace who weren't raised religious, to convert without LARPing. So I mean, and I'm well, being just such a person, I'm inclined to disagree. But it is an interesting notion. So I wanted your thoughts on that.
Yeah. That's certainly his. I think that's his own personal experience, and probably the experience of the world that he lives in and sees. And I think that there's he's unaware of a much wider world of religious world. I think that at one stage, his wife died, and he wrote a number of poems during that period, which was very.
Oh, I've seemed to have lost you. I don't know if you can still hear me. I'm going to try and call you back and see if that works. Oh, there we go. You're back.
Back?
Now I hear you again.
Yeah. Okay, I don't know what happened there.
Sorry, it cut out when you said the poems that he wrote about his deceased wife were very good.
He wrote poems about around that period, and some of them dealt with his inability to believe, to have religious emotions, and so on. So I think that he's genuine on that sort of level, and I like his poetry in general too. Yeah.
Do you think that's a
LARPing? I guess he's a person who, as he says in one, he doesn't like white gloves, and he doesn't like. This is the formalism as well. It's sort of like you should be what you are. Presidents should be presidents, and so forth. And so he's opposed to all forms of LARPing. I think that's what that amounts to. Whether it's possible to return to a traditional religious point of view in effect or not is another question.
But do you think that's a widespread issue for people? And sort of departing a little from politics here, but I think that's okay. That's a widespread problem for us moderns, for people that they can't. It's even if they have, because I get the sense from him that there is some interest or desire to be religious, but that it feels somehow that it feels fundamentally inauthentic. Do you think that's a problem for a lot of people? Because it's just not something I've considered before.
I get that sense too, and that's the word, authenticity. He just doesn't think that it's authentic. That's why he characterises it as role playing. It's acting it out. It's not really like Buddhists. I don't know, sitting meditating and chanting in Tibetan. He thinks that's role playing, and it's not authentic. I think that's the obstacle there.
But
that indeed can be a problem, can't it be? That say a Buddhist convert to Buddhism, living in New York, might find themselves living between cultures and different. The whole experience may be confusing and may not be authentic. That is obviously a problem.
And as he's as he's wont to say, the past is a foreign country. So, even for someone trying to return to their own ancestral religion, this problem of I could imagine that, for example, let's say a Catholic, an Italian revert to Catholicism in living in New York might also feel inauthentic, particularly if they're trying to be a traditional Catholic. I mean, what are you doing looking at the back of this man talking in Latin?
I know traditional Catholics, and they struggle in the workaday world. They have to go to work and deal with other people with entirely different values, and that can be difficult. You're living in two worlds.
It's just something that really I don't know, captures my curiosity about how widespread that issue is for people who have some interest in religion, that they feel blocked by a sense of inauthenticity. And I can understand that maybe because it is such a foreign world, the past. But
I think so. I attribute the return to Catholicism to that to some extent, because we are seeing that. When I grew up with John F. Kennedy, and one of the problems with John F. Kennedy was he was a Catholic, and people were very suspicious of Catholics. You know, how could he be a president and still obey a foreign leader, namely the Pope? So those were real questions in those days. Whereas now, one of the things that Mr. Trump has done is tamed the Catholics and consolidated a certain post-liberal Catholicism within the Republican Party. And so you see Mr. Vance and there's lots of Catholics there. I think that that's a quest for authenticity, for a traditional form of religion, and that is not exotic. So I think, and I'm reading articles too where there's a big movement of young people in Europe to Catholicism, particularly young men, and so all of that might be encouraging in a sense, but I think it's a quest for authenticity. Yeah.
So you mentioned the term accelerationism a little while ago, which makes me think of the other, and I know you said you haven't read nearly as much of him, but the other major neo-reactionary. But if you have anything to say about Land, I'd be very interested to hear it. Just your thoughts.
No, I don't. I can't say very much about Land because I haven't read very much. I've just read some of the essays. And what other people have written about him, you know, he's referenced in other places and so forth. So I've got a general drift of what he's on about. But it's a very incendiary type of accelerationism that he was promoting anyway. I'm not sure where he's at now or what he's doing.
Well, I mean,
but I was sort of surprised that it became a fixture in neo-reaction canon. But then so did Bronze Age Pervert. So, you know, it's a very broad tent. There's some people are interested primarily in just that intellectual energy, I think, in all of that.
Well, yeah, because it's
and certainly Land has got a lot of that.
And there's also interesting about Land is he has this, in some ways he seems more in tune with the Musks and Teals than Yarvin does, because there's this.
Oh, certainly.
I'm sure you've read the Lamplighter. I forget, was it Sam Atwell in the Lamplighter? Something. It was Yarvin wrote a piece with the Lamplighter in the title, and that had this sort of Kaczynski strain in it that I appreciated. It's interesting because even though he is who he is with Urbit and so on, there seems to be a little bit of skepticism about technology, which I think is very healthy and I appreciate.
Yes.
And Land represents the polar opposite of that. So in a way, Land seems to be sort of more in keeping with the tech bros.
Yeah, true. That's right. Earlier on, I was like casting Yarvin as like a tech guy, and therefore in that world. But in fact, as you can see from Urbit and things like that, in some ways, he's got a very conservative sort of view of that. He wants to go back and start again, rather than forging forward and blazing ahead, which is much more your Muskian sort of adolescent futurism. And I think that's what I sense in Land anyway. Sort of this, I call it an adolescent futurism because it's a worldview of the Big Bang Theory and Space Odyssey and that sort of sci-fi world. And I find it pretty horrifying, all of that. But Yarvin is a tech guy who's much more palatable. He's not like that. No, he's not a rabid futurist.
I mean, frankly, sorry, go on.
What he's interested in with Herbert, for instance, what he's interested in is using technology to reinforce libertarian ideas or things like that, using technology to bring about desirable outcomes for him. Whereas Musk and people like that are much more gung-ho about techno-optimism or heroic capitalism is what you have with those people. They call it heroic capitalism.
Which, I mean, I wonder if Musk, this is also on a bit of a tangent, but Burnham is one of Yarvin's big influences. And I often, I've never seen any evidence that Musk has read, or any of the heroic capitalist set have read Burnham, but I could well imagine that he would resonate with them. The sort of, it's you know, I don't know if you've read Burnham, but sorry, go on, please.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think they have. Yeah, that's right.
Just because Burnham gives a sort of class war account where the capitalists are the good guys. So I wonder. I mean, sadly,
that would certainly be their flavour, but I don't know.
It's a shame I can't secure an interview with those people, because I mean, it's a number of things I wonder, just wondering out loud. Like there seem to be a couple of authors that seem like they would have some resonance with Yarvin, but it doesn't, as far as I can see, doesn't seem to really be too interested in them. Like I know he's read Evelop, but he seems quite dismissive of him. And I can't find any evidence that he's read Spengler, but you would have thought there'd be quite a lot of he'd find to appreciate in Spengler.
Yeah, that's true. And I'm following Yarvin's sort of intellectual autobiography, which is what his blog was. Following him, I'm always surprised at the turns that he takes. So that, yes, you'd expect him to take a turn towards Spengler at some stage, but he goes into Carlyle at that stage, and so he pursues a very unusual pedigree of books and thinkers, and not the ones that you would expect. Everywhere, people like that, I think he's interested in them as a storehouse of shocking ideas that he can shock people with. But I don't think he takes much on board from all of that.
I mean, I would have thought, I also haven't found much evidence that he's read any of that either, but I think Land might have more interest in metaphysics. I mean, in a very perverted, dark way, but an interest nonetheless. You did say that you felt you could say... Hello, I'm very sorry, I don't know what happened.
No, I don't know what happened either, it just dropped out.
One of the ghosts in the machine. You said you thought you could say some things about Bronze Age Pervert, which I'd be very interested to hear.
Well, Bronze Age Pervert is also an interesting character. So I became interested because I'm interested in things Greek, and so he's got this sort of Bronze Age sort of patter that he puts on, sort of neo-Homeric, which is I'm just naturally interested in that, and it's humorous, and there's the accents, and there's his Caribbean hideaway and all of that. It's enormously entertaining. But then of course, what you encounter there is once again someone who's tries to completely step outside of the modern frame, and in fact, in his case, he wants to go full paleo. He wants to go all the way back to a Bronze Age warrior mentality. But in his case, it's a reaction to feminisation. It has a masculinist agenda, and he too draws a lot of attention from from young people who are interested in his outrageousness and attracted by his outrageous ideas. It's very entertaining. But I think that's what it is. It's a full reactionary masculinist sort of material. But so it appeals to the to the gym sort of people and that aspect of neo-reaction, which was at least a very important part of neo-reaction. I guess is sort of embodied in some way by RFK.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't made that connection. I wonder if he's read BAP.
Sorry?
It's a good connection you've made there, and I wonder if RFK has read BAP. I remember hearing... I mean, I say that totally seriously, because I remember reading that... hearing that Yarvin gave a copy of the Bronze Age Mindset is the book, right? That he gave a copy to Michael Anton. So it's conceivable that he's read in those circles. And if so, I do wonder if RFK's read him. I'm not sure.
Possibly. It would be. It's certainly in that muscle building lift sort of crowd. Bronze Age perverts on the fringes of that world. So yeah, he's very likely to have encountered the name and possibly read it. Yeah.
I mean, I'm.
Yeah, there's.
Go on, please.
There's a different. They're offering a very different sort of paradigm of health, and it's what you have there is. Vitalism, a type of vitalism, a return of almost 19th century vitalism.
That's interesting. It's interesting you say, he'd probably be very displeased with that, right? That a return of 19th century vitalism, AD and not BC.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I do.
Well, but that gets to because I mean, look, you know much more about the Bronze Age than I do, so I wondered how authentic you think BAP's presentation of it is, of the Bronze Age mindset, or is it something closer to Yarvin as a kind of a modern pick and mix?
No, it's a modern pick and mix. It's very much a modern pick and mix. He even more than Yarvin, it's just essentially a provocateur, I think.
Right.
So essentially he's a provocateur, but his particular philosophy is masculinist vitalism. It's all about health and building lots of muscles and lifting heavy weights and taking supplements, and there's a sort of Puritanism in that. There's a sort of and often, of course, in Bronze Age pervert, and the reason he's blacklisted so often is because of his racial content. There's a certain racial purity sort of aspect to it as well. Anti-feminist and undertones of white politics, yeah.
Yeah, and some anti-Semitism.
So that's sort of the nasty side of the Bronze Age pervert. I'm much more interested in the side of it that wants to promote sort of a new engagement with the archaic, which is what I'm interested in, as opposed to let's say the Schuonian engagement with the primitive.
Well, that's interesting. Could you go into that distinction a bit more?
Mm. Um, yeah, the question, I guess, for me is which of those two is closer to the primordial. I always use the phrase the primitive is not the primordial. They're different. And Schuon, as you know, sort of extracts a primordial or a perennialism from the Plains Indians, and that's pre-literate tradition. Whereas Bronze Age Pervert, he's not interested in that at all. He's interested in returning to the values of the heroic age, of the Homeric age.
Oh, and
They're much more military values. There's no military values in Shuang. So I see those. They're two different types of an appeal to a former period, a former.
I think I've lost. Might have lost you again.
Ideal. You got it?
No, yeah. Sorry, it dropped out a couple of times there, but it's. I think we got the essence of what you were saying, which is that they're two different appeals to a former period.
Yeah. Bronze Age Pervert sort of promotes the heroic ideal, heroic values, whereas Schuon is drawing upon a different thing entirely. Yeah.
But if you think that his presentation of the Bronze Age isn't very authentic, doesn't that sort of undermine his project quite a lot there?
Yeah. I don't think he's a serious restorationist in the way that some neo-pagans are. You meet neo-pagans who are trying to make a serious restoration of some pagan tradition, some early pagan tradition, learning obscure languages and so forth. I don't think there's anything like that in BAP. He's a provocateur who just particularly likes the values of the heroic age, of the, warrior caste. And so the other interesting thing about him, and you get this in Evola as well, is that he's a military type. He's warrior caste, if you like, and so he's looking for a spirituality and a politics and an ethos, a way to be that in modernity, and so he's interesting from that point of view.
Yeah, which is a dilemma a difficulty I have a great interest in. Because it's a very knotty position to be in, to try to live that way authentically in modernity. I'm not entirely convinced it's even a problem that's solvable, but it's something I wrestle with. What I do wonder though is that Yarvin seems to have a great deal of appreciation for BAP. I mean, I've seen him reference him quite a few times, just express his appreciation of him, but he never makes clear what it is about him he appreciates. Do you have any sort of sense for what it is that...
Well, in the first instance, I'm suspicious that he's just interested in him as a provocateur,
right?
And that he uses him as a store of hand grenades that he can throw and shock people with. There's a bit of that. As for what's compatible between the two philosophies, it's hard to see. That's right. They're contemporaneous. They were both sort of in the limelight at the same time, and so they got into some mutual appreciation. But on the face of it, Yarvin's a very different project than that, except that they're compatible in as much as they're both neo-reaction, and that they're undermining or questioning or challenging aspects of the establishment progressives. Although very different aspects of it. You know, there's not a great deal of anti-feminism or anything like that. Masculinism in Yarvin. He's an artistic type. He's not a warrior type, and so it's hard to see what they have in common yet.
I mean, it's strange because they do seem to that appreciation does seem to be mutual. I mean, I think Bap got started writing for Social Matter. That was his very first his first public writings, which was sort of, you know, the built around Yarvin's project, that website. I don't think Yarvin was involved with it at all, but actually, I even think that Yarvin was on Bap's podcast, thinking about it. Yeah, I think
that'd be interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't heard the whole thing, but I've seen clips from it on YouTube. So I didn't get sort of get to see the full the whole fullness of their interaction, but they clearly seem to have sort of a mutual admiration. So which is very odd.
Yeah.
It seems
I don't. It is odd. I find it odd. Yarvin's sort of all over my YouTube feed. He's very prolific on podcasts. He's overexposed, I reckon.
Yeah, I tried.
He seems to be on everything.
I tried my hardest to get him. I tried my hardest to get an interview with him, but I didn't have any luck getting in contact.
No? Oh, okay. I'll keep trying. He's all over the place. He's on every podcast lately.
Yeah, he does a lot. But I don't know. I'll keep at it. But who knows? Maybe he'll see this. In which case, please do get in contact.
He does love an audience. He loves an audience. So
yeah, it's. I know. I'd really like to talk to him because the most interesting thing about him to me is there's many question marks. I mean, for example, I'd love to get to know if he has read Spengler, and if not, why not, and why he hasn't sort of, just interrogate all of that. Yeah.
I'd like him to read Roger Sauter's essay, A Contrary History of the West, which I'd like a lot of people to read, but Yarvin could digest something like that. That might be helpful. I'd like to know how much of Gaiman he's made his way through too. Things like that.
Well, and what else in on the off chance that I get to interview him, what else would you want to know?
Gee, I don't know. Hold on, a stack of questions about orbit, I guess. No, I'd be interested in, what is, just big questions, like, what sort of society would you actually like to live in? What would be good? What's your idea of the good? That's the question. What's your idea of the good? What is it? It's one thing to criticise an existing paradigm. Can we offer a better one? That's the question.
And that's a very, very good question, because he sort of, approached that question, but then not gone all the way. He said things sort of that the health of the people is the whole of the good, or something, the pub, or something to that effect. It's a Latin phrase, and I'm ashamed I can't remember it. Maybe you're more familiar, but it just sort of begs the question: what's the health of the people then?
Yeah. That's right. And the question of the mandate of heaven: where exactly does sovereignty come from? Is it just, you elect the CEO, you elect the monarch, or something? I think that all of that needs to be. I'd like to quiz him about all of that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it would. I'm hoping maybe this one can generate a little interest. Not that I have a particularly large audience, but but one can hope. Yeah,
No, it's good. It's good that you're asking questions about political perennialism, because I know that from my experience of it, when we were engaged very much with traditionalism or perennialism, with Harry Oldmeadow and Roger Sauter and so on, we avoided the political aspects of perennialism. We talked about Schuon primarily, Game On, Burckhardt, and it's largely based on art and architecture and religion. But from time to time, students would wander into Evola or some of that Eastern European traditionalists. And say, hey, what's this? This is a totally different world of traditionalism, and there's nowhere in between those two. We neglected developing any sort of coherent idea of a political philosophy and perennialism. Although I guess in my context, someone like Roger Sauter would say, "Well, we don't need to. We've got the Republic. We've got Plato and Aristotle as foundations, anyway." But a traditional politics is an important thing to clarify.
Yeah, and I mean that's just the thing. I discovered traditionalism. The first person I encountered was Evola, which I think is true for a lot of people, particularly of sort of my age.
Yeah.
And frankly, I found Evola highly unsatisfactory. I didn't like him at all. But then from there, I found Genon and then Schuon, and that was much. That really, really resonated with me. I mean, Crisis of the Modern World changed my life, and I'm not being hyperbolic when I say that. What's lacking, what I'm trying to address, is a political theory that is true to and consistent with the perspective of Schuon and Genon. And yeah, okay, there's differences there, but on the whole, it's congruent. And not Evola and Dugan, which I think is even further removed. But yeah, that's what I mean. The Tage Lindbom has that's the closest you get to a political theory with that kind of foundation. But I think there's a lot that he left unaddressed. I think what he wrote was excellent, but there's a lot more to be said.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been interested from time to time in Rudolf Steiner's movement for a threefold commonwealth, which was an interesting development in the early 20th century. And while Steiner is based in theosophy, his threefold commonwealth is a very Platonic idea. So that there are all sorts of byways of traditional political thinking left to be explored, I think, and that's one in particular that I find interesting. But that's entirely outside of Yarvin and co.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'd like to let's wrap this up so that it's sort of thematically contained. But if you're open to it, I'd really like to have another conversation, sort of about these things, and particularly since that is your sort of area of expertise, Plato and things of that nature.
Yeah, sure. Sure, that would be good.
Yeah,
that would be good. Yarvin's a really interesting thinker. He's a very American contemporary sort of thinker, and I guess I sort of disappointed in the end, because I was hoping that there'd be more sort of Plato or more traditional ideas in there. Instead, you get this very astute analysis of power. But in the end, from a traditional point of view, it doesn't doesn't reach into questions of sovereignty and things like that, which are crucial.
Well, I think that's a wonderful summary. Well, thank you very much for your time. And would you like me to put the links to Out of Phase or your YouTube channel, or I can put that in the description if you'd like? Or would you
yeah, perhaps the YouTube channel or whatever you think's appropriate. Yeah, sure.
Right. Well, yeah.
Yeah, there's not much political stuff in my YouTube channel, but but there is more in the Facebook group. Yeah.
And also, you know, I mean, one of the sort of the primary aims of my project is to point people beyond politics to matters of greater importance. So yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you very much, and I look forward to our next conversation.
All right. Yeah, many thanks. Many thanks for the opportunity to speak. Sorry we had the mix-up with the time.
No, that's my fault.
That's good.
But won't happen next time.
Yeah. All right, thanks for that.
All right, thank you. Have a good day.